Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little darker than usual. You're going to walk with me through dim, foggy alleys where the only sounds are your own breath and the soft, frantic scurrying of tiny feet. No, you're not imagining it. There are rats, lots of them, and something tells me they know more than we do. We're heading to 14th century Europe. The world is slower, filthier, and smells like a mixture of unwashed wool and regret. But something else is in the air, something no one can quite name yet. People whisper about bad air, or God's wrath. You know, just medieval things. It starts small. A cough, a shiver, a strange swelling beneath the arm. You're not too worried until someone's skin starts turning black, and then they stop moving altogether. The church bells toll for them, then again, and again. And then they just stop ringing altogether. Because there's no one left to ring them. You wouldn't survive, honestly. Not even with your Whole Foods, immunity shots, and overpriced scented sanitizer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from a cold little village at 2 a.m. or a buzzing city just past midnight, tell me in the comments where and when you are right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through the edge of an Italian town, maybe Genoa. It's unusually quiet. Not a single merchant yelling about his cheese or pushing fermented fish in your face. You pass a house where the windows are nailed shut, another with a red X painted on the door, and then you hear it, low, constant, like a whisper too, tired to shout, scratching, tiny nails on wood. You glance down and there they are. Rats. Black ones. They're not afraid of you. In fact, one stops, looks right at you like you're the intruder, and then keeps going. Its belly full. Its eyes dull. No one suspects them yet. Not really. People think the sickness is divine punishment or maybe a bad alignment of planets. Science, after all, still believes in balancing humors with leeches and putting onions in your armpits to draw out evil vapors. But if you could follow one rat, just one, you'd see something else. You'd see fleas. Dozens of them, digging, deep into skin, gorging on blood, and jumping off when their host gets too cold. Too dead. This plague doesn't roar in. It whispers. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps. You hear someone coughing behind a shuttered window. Then nothing. The door opens a few hours later. Not by the person who coughed, but by a man with a cart. He doesn't knock. He just waits. Then drags a body out by the feet and tosses it onto a pile that's already leaking fluids into the cobblestone. You cover your mouth. Not that it'll help. And here's the weird part. In this world of candles and crosses, people try anything to ward off death. They carry sachets of lavender or cloves. They wear beaks full of herbs, thinking the scent will protect them. You know that classic plague doctor mask? Yeah, it's not a fashion statement, it's a desperate guess. You walk past a butcher's shop, closed, the meat inside crawling with flies. A dog limps past, ribs showing. There are no cats around anymore. People killed them, thinking they were agents of the devil. Ironically, it was the cats who could have helped keep the rats at bay. Oops. A priest staggers out of a nearby alley. He's muttering Latin, swinging incense, eyes wild with exhaustion. He's been blessing corpses all night. The poor man doesn't know the smoke isn't doing anything. If anything, it might be helping spread the fleas. You start noticing other things. A child left crying beside a body. A merchant giving away bread not out of kindness but because he knows he won't need his stock much longer. A woman washing her hands raw in vinegar. A group of nobles in masks hurrying into a locked villa. You won't see them again. Historians today argue about where it began. Some point to China, others to Central Asia. Carried by Mongol traders, some say. Brought over by infected marmots, say others. Even now there's debate. Was it truly Yersinia pestis, the bacteria we blame for the Black Death, or something more airborne? Or maybe several diseases stacked together like a horrifying lasagna of doom? But for you walking these haunted streets, none of that matters. All you know is that every breath feels dangerous. And yet, there's something oddly calm about the silence. The world is slowing down. The cities are emptying. Fields are untended. Markets are closed. But the sun still rises. Birds still sing. Death doesn't rage. It waits. Quietly, patiently. And the rats? They thrive. They slip through cracks, chew through sacks of grain, and carry their little passengers everywhere, like Uber drivers for microscopic death. A real, 5-star service if you're into that. You sit on the edge of a fountain trying to catch your breath. The statue above you is cracked, its face eroded by time, or maybe by grief. You can't tell anymore. There's a song stuck in your head, a lullaby someone hummed earlier. Something about angels and rest. You hum it softly to yourself, almost, like a warding spell. Then somewhere in the distance a bell rings once, not a funeral bell this time. Just a small chapel calling for evening prayer. You almost smile, almost, because in that moment you feel something land on your arm. It's light, almost nothing, a flea, but you don't see it. And even if you did, you wouldn't think twice. And so the whisper continues. You follow the trail backward now, away from the crumbling churches and the cartfuls of bodies, back along dusty trade roads where silk once shimmered in the sun, and the smell of cinnamon meant profit, not prophecy. The Silk Road, they call. It romantic, isn't it? But tonight, you're going to see what else it carried, besides fine cloth and broken promises. You start in the east, where the winds are dry and the mountains sharper than memory. The Mongol Empire stretches like a giant's arm across continents, its arteries pulsing with caravans. Silk, spices, jewels, and fleas, buried in the warm pelts of animals and nestled deep in the straw bedding of merchants' carts. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one ever wrote on a map. Rats love trade, and fleas love rats. And death? Well, death loves a good network. You're standing in the middle of Samarkand now. Markets buzz, horses snort, and silver changes hands like whispered secrets. You smell roasted lamb, hear children laughing, see monks and mystics passing scrolls between fingers stained with ink. But under it all, literally, in the straw and shadows, there's movement. Tiny, relentless. Somewhere nearby, a merchant sneezes. Someone laughs. Someone else flinches. You wouldn't notice the difference. But the bacteria does. It multiplies. It waits. It hitches a ride. One caravan, moving west. That's all it takes. They travel for weeks, months. The air changes. The people change. But the rats, still there, still warm, still mobile. Some historians argue the plague entered Europe through this very artery, funneled along with bolts of silk and barrels of pepper. Others point to ships, ports, soldiers. But no matter where you start, all the roads seem to lead back to trade, our beautiful, deadly lifeline. A caravan enters the Black Sea port of Tana. You're there as the wheels creak, and the guards barely ow. Glance at the travelers. Why would they? The traders are tired, sunburnt, and eager to sell. No one checks the crates for fleas. No one sees the bloated rat corpse under the grain sack. From here, the disease hops a boat like it's got tickets to Venice. But let's pause here for a moment, because this part is truly strange. You see, not everyone dies. Some people, randomly, maddeningly, just survive. They touch the same fabrics, eat the same bread, breathe the same air, and yet, they live. Some scientists today think it might have been genetic, a quirk, a microscopic lottery. But back then, no one knows why little Marta survives while the priest next door drops mid-sermon. Some towns are wiped clean, others seem to be skipped, no pattern, just chaos in slow motion. Back on the trade road, you stop for water near a small encampment. A Mongol guard sits nearby, picking something off his arm. You see the welt, dark, angry. He scratches until it bleeds. Shrugs, doesn't seem to care. 3 days later, half the camp is coughing. You decide to move on. And here's the kicker. The Mongol Empire wasn't just about horses and arrows. It was about connection, safe passage, stability across thousands of miles. They made the Silk Road safer and faster. which meant the plague could move like never before. Oops. The disease slithers into every pouch, every sleeve, every fold of velvet. Silk is the perfect carrier. Soft, warm, tightly packed, almost like skin. And you wonder how many bolts of fabric brought not just beauty but doom to the markets of Constantinople. You arrive in that city under a pink-orange sky, the Hagia Sophia glowing like a memory. Merchants cheer as new goods arrive. Perfume, pearls, a few sick camels. Nothing to worry about, they think. You want to scream, "Don't touch that crate!" But it's already too late, a fact you might not know. Some port officials in the East began to suspect something was wrong before Europe even caught wind. In parts of the Middle East, bodies piled up in silence. Letters mention a strange wind, a curse. But no one stops the trade. No one wants to. The merchants have money to make. The officials have taxes to collect. The sailors have no clue what's in their own cargo, so everything continues. All according to plan, until people start dying in patterns. 3 in one household, 5 in another. Whole streets go quiet. Not just in one town, but many. Like dots on a map being connected by an invisible hand. You walk through another caravanserai. It smells of sweat, wood smoke, and cumin. There's a lute playing softly. A woman sings in a language you don't know, but it sounds like longing. Maybe for home, maybe for peace. And beneath it all, the shuffle of rats in the dark. You start to notice something peculiar. The rats aren't sick. They're thriving. Well-fed. Fearless. Some historians today believe the fleas jumped to humans only when the rats began to die en masse. That when the primary host disappeared, they found a new one. Us. How charming. You reach the edges of Europe now. The port towns start to change. The bells sound different, the clothes, the faces. But the fear? It's starting to look familiar, because soon someone will cough in Genoa, or Messina, or Constantinople, and then the rats will step ashore. You stand at the edge of the dock. The sun is setting, golden on the water. The cargo is being unloaded. One sailor stumbles, clutching his gut. No one notices. But you do, because you've been following this thing all the way from the east, through dust and gold and blood, and now you know exactly what's coming, but no one else does. Not yet. You step onto the deck of a creaking ship, cutting through the restless Mediterranean bound for Sicily. The salty air should feel refreshing, but instead, there's a heavy weight hanging over everything, like the fog before a storm that never quite clears. This isn't just a ship, it's a floating coffin, packed with terrified sailors, crates of spices, bolts of silk, and the invisible passengers no one wants to acknowledge. As the vessel approaches the bustling port of Messina, you notice the usual signs of a thriving trade hub. Fishermen unloading their catch, merchants shouting deals in a dozen languages, children darting through narrow streets chasing stray dogs. But there's an undercurrent, something you can't see but can feel. Unease. And then the first cases appear. A sailor collapses in the alleyway, clutching his chest, his face pale and sweating. The hospital nearby, a humble place, is quickly overwhelmed. Bodies pile up in corners, prayers mix with curses. You hear whispers. The Black Death. A curse from the east. God's wrath. The city tries to respond. Quarantines are imposed. Ships are ordered to anchor away from the shore, and the sick are isolated. But it's too late. The plague doesn't respect boundaries or walls. It slips through the cracks into homes, markets, and churches. What's chilling is how fast it moves. You imagine the disease like a shadow racing through cobblestone streets, slipping into open windows, hitching rides on rats in every corner. Messina's population is halved in a matter of months, and other Sicilian cities start to report similar outbreaks. Here's a fact you probably didn't hear in history class. Some doctors of the time believed the disease was caused by miasma, or bad air, and recommended carrying sweet-smelling herbs or sitting near fires to purify the air. They had no idea that the real enemy was a microscopic bacterium hitching rides on fleas. As the plague tightens its grip, social order begins to unravel. People avoid each other like they're already dead. Families are torn apart. Religious fervor spikes, with flagellants whipping themselves in public, hoping to cleanse their sins and stop the plague. Others blame minorities, leading to horrific persecutions. You wander through a deserted marketplace where fruit rots on the stalls, and the only sound is the occasional distant bell tolling a funeral. The city looks abandoned, but the plague is very much alive, and it's not just Sicily. Ships fleeing Messina carry the disease to mainland Italy, France, and beyond. The pandemic is no longer a distant nightmare. It's at everyone's doorstep. Some historians argue that Sicily's position as a Mediterranean crossroads made it the perfect entry point for the Black Death into Europe. Others suggest multiple simultaneous introductions, but all agree on one thing. Once the plague landed in Sicily, it was unstoppable. You imagine yourself in a simple Sicilian home, doors barred, candles flickering, a mother cradling a feverish child. The shadows dance on the walls as she prays for mercy, while outside the world crumbles silently, and you can't help but wonder, if the Silk Road carried silk and spices, why did it have to bring death as well? Sometimes the most beautiful routes are the deadliest. You take a deep breath, trying to shake the heaviness. But the ship isn't done yet. The journey continues, spreading sickness and fear, changing history forever. You step onto the deck of a creaking ship, cutting through the restless Mediterranean bound for Sicily. The salty air should feel refreshing, but instead, there's a heavy weight hanging over everything, like the fog before a storm that never quite clears. This isn't just a ship, it's a floating coffin, packed with terrified sailors, crates of spices, bolts of silk, and the invisible passengers no one wants to acknowledge. As the vessel approaches the bustling port of Messina, you notice the usual signs of a thriving trade hub. Fishermen unloading their catch, merchants shouting deals in a dozen languages, children darting through narrow streets chasing stray dogs. But there's an undercurrent, something you can't see but can feel. Unease. And then the first cases appear. A sailor collapses in the alleyway, clutching his chest, his face pale and sweating. The hospital nearby, a humble place, is quickly overwhelmed. Bodies pile up in corners, prayers mix with curses. You hear whispers. The Black Death. A curse from the east. God's wrath. The city tries to respond. Quarantines are imposed. Ships are ordered to anchor away from the shore, and the sick are isolated. But it's too late. The plague doesn't respect boundaries or walls. It slips through the cracks into homes, markets, and churches. What's chilling is how fast it moves. You imagine the disease like a shadow racing through cobblestone streets, slipping into open windows, hitching rides on rats in every corner. Messina's population is halved in a matter of months, and other Sicilian cities start to report similar outbreaks. Here's a fact you probably didn't hear in history class. Some doctors of the time believed the disease was caused by miasma, or bad air, and recommended carrying sweet-smelling herbs or sitting near fires to purify the air. They had no idea that the real enemy was a microscopic bacterium hitching rides on fleas. As the plague tightens its grip, social order begins to unravel. People avoid each other like they're already dead. Families are torn apart. Religious fervor spikes, with flagellants whipping themselves in public, hoping to cleanse their sins and stop the plague. Others blame minorities, leading to horrific persecutions. You wander through a deserted marketplace where fruit rots on the stalls, and the only sound is the occasional distant bell tolling a funeral. The city looks abandoned, but the plague is very much alive, and it's not just Sicily. Ships fleeing Messina carry the disease to mainland Italy, France, and beyond. The pandemic is no longer a distant nightmare. It's at everyone's doorstep. Some historians argue that Sicily's position as a Mediterranean crossroads made it the perfect entry point for the Black Death into Europe. Others suggest multiple simultaneous introductions, but all agree on one thing. Once the plague landed in Sicily, it was unstoppable. You imagine yourself in a simple Sicilian home, doors barred, candles flickering, a mother cradling a feverish child. The shadows dance on the walls as she prays for mercy, while outside the world crumbles silently, and you can't help but wonder, if the Silk Road carried silk and spices, why did it have to bring death as well? Sometimes the most beautiful routes are the deadliest. You take a deep breath, trying to shake the heaviness. But the ship isn't done yet. The journey continues, spreading sickness and fear, changing history forever. You find yourself drifting southward along the Italian coast, where the once bustling port cities now seem like ghost towns cloaked in silence. The Black Death, no longer a mysterious visitor, has rooted itself deeply into the fabric of daily life. The air is thick, not just with the scent of salt and seaweed, but with despair and the faint bitter smell of death. Naples, Venice, Genoa, names that once conjured images of vibrant trade and cultural splendor now echo with hollow emptiness. Markets are shuttered, streets deserted, and the walls of grand palaces seem to weep with the stories of those lost. You move through these empty corridors as if walking inside a nightmare that refuses to end. And here's the chilling truth. The plague didn't just kill, it rewrote the rules of society. Entire families vanished, leaving estates unclaimed and fields untended. The labor shortage was so severe that peasants found themselves in rare positions of power, demanding better wages and conditions. The old order trembled, and a new one began to stir, though forged in tragedy. But amidst the suffering, some sought explanations beyond the obvious. You overhear townsfolk whispering about divine punishment, witches, and secret poisons. The desperate clung to faith while fear bred paranoia and violence. Scapegoats were hunted relentlessly. Jewish communities, outsiders, anyone different. Horrific pogroms swept through towns, fueled by ignorance and panic. You might think people today have seen it all, but here's something you didn't expect. Some doctors actually wore what looked like bird masks stuffed with herbs, hoping to shield themselves from the bad air. It's as if they dressed as plague-fighting superheroes, albeit without any real superpowers. Meanwhile, art and literature began to change, mirroring the grim reality. The dance of death, or dance macabre, became a haunting motif, reminding everyone that death comes for all, king and peasant alike. You can almost hear the hollow drumbeat calling everyone to join the dance. Despite it all, life stubbornly clings on. People keep whispering hopes of a cure, of better days. They bury their dead as best they can, plant crops, and wait. Because, what else is there to do when the world is falling apart? Historians still debate how exactly the plague spread so efficiently through Europe. Was it just bad luck, a perfect storm of ecology and trade? Or was human fear and reaction partly to blame? Whatever the answer, the Black Death didn't just take lives, it altered the course of history. You pause for a moment, imagining what it would have been like to live then, to feel the dread every time someone coughed or a neighbor vanished. It's a sobering thought, and a reminder that even in the darkest times, humanity's resilience flickers like a fragile candle in the Yuan wind. You step away from the silent streets, the echo of the past lingering in your mind, knowing the plague's story is far from over. You find yourself drifting further into the heart of Europe, where the Black Death has seeped into every crevice of life, turning bustling towns into eerie tombs. The disease doesn't just claim bodies, it shakes the foundations of belief, science, and society in ways no one could have imagined. Picture yourself in a medieval village. The church bells, once a comforting sound, now toll endlessly, marking funerals instead of celebrations. You notice people's faces, gaunt, hollow, eyes shadowed with grief or fear. You hear whispered rumors that the plague is a punishment for humanity's sins, a divine fire cleansing the earth. But amid the sorrow, a curious thing happens. Some start questioning everything. Priests who preached forgiveness now seem powerless. Doctors armed with little more than superstition struggle to make sense of the invisible killer. You can almost see the frustration in their eyes behind those beaked masks filled with herbs. Here's a strange fact. The plague actually accelerated medical knowledge in some ways. With so many dying, doctors and scholars began to observe patterns, document symptoms, and question old dogmas. It was the grim mother of scientific inquiry, pushing Europe slowly toward the Renaissance. Yet the true cause, the bacterium Yersinia pestis, would remain a mystery for centuries. As death marched on, the economy staggered. Trade slowed, prices soared, and famine threatened where crops were left untended. But oddly, wages for laborers rose sharply due to the shortage of workers. Social mobility, once nearly impossible, crept forward on the back of tragedy. You also notice how the plague unleashed waves of cruelty and kindness, sometimes in the same breath. Flagellant processions whip through towns, begging for mercy, while others take advantage of chaos to loot and betray. Communities fracture, but some come together in remarkable solidarity. Caregivers risking their lives to tend the sick, neighbors sharing what little they have. Historians debate whether the Black Death's social upheaval planted seeds for modern Europe's transformation. Did it hasten the decline of feudalism? Did it shift power toward the common people? The answers remain tangled in the fog of history. As you wander a ruined chapel, you see frescoes fading, images of saints and sinners, life and death intertwined. The plague's shadow lingers not only on stone but in the psyche of a continent, struggling to heal. You take a breath, feeling the weight of a world undone but also the fragile hope rising from its ashes. It's a paradox. Devastation, breeding renewal. Death carving the path for life to begin anew. And you know this isn't the end of the story, only a turning point. You walk into the late medieval city of London, where narrow winding streets smell of smoke, waste, and fear. The Black Death has made its grim entrance here, and the city is a shadow of its former self. Shops closed, houses abandoned, the Thames flowing silently past piles of refuse and hastily buried bodies. The plague has turned one of Europe's greatest cities into a ghostly labyrinth. You watch as the authorities try to maintain some semblance of order. Officials pass laws demanding that the sick be isolated, bodies buried quickly, and gatherings banned. They even introduce one of the earliest forms of quarantine. People suspected of infection must stay locked in their homes for 40 days. 40 days of silence, sickness, and desperation. Sounds almost like an ancient version of Netflix and chill, but with a lot less chilling and a lot more dying. Despite the measures, the plague sweeps mercilessly through the population. You see neighbors abandoning each other, and hear of families fleeing the city, hoping to outrun the invisible enemy. But the disease moves faster than any horse or cart. Here's a lesser-known detail. Some Londoners believed the plague was spread by bad smells, so they carried pomanders, little balls filled with fragrant spices and herbs, to mask the stench. Imagine walking down the street smelling like a walking potpourri while death lurks in every corner. Not quite the perfume you'd expect. Social order phrase as the death toll climbs. Skilled workers perish, causing economic disruption. Wages spike, and laborers gain leverage for the first time in centuries. The Black Death doesn't just kill, it shakes the very foundations of medieval society. Religious responses range from devout prayer to horrifying scapegoating. The infamous persecution of Jewish communities unfolds, driven by fear and prejudice. Innocent people are blamed for poisoning wells or cursing the land. It's a tragic reminder that fear often breeds cruelty. Amid the darkness, however, some remarkable acts of kindness emerge. Monks and nuns care for the sick, despite knowing they risk their own lives. Communities find ways to support one another, planting seeds of compassion amidst chaos. Historians still debate London's response. Was it a model of early public health or a desperate scramble fueled by ignorance? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. As you imagine the city's narrow alleys and smoky hearths, you feel the weight of countless untold stories, families torn apart, love lost, and a society struggling to hold itself together. And somewhere, beneath the surface, a new world is beginning to stir, a world shaped forever by the lessons of the plague. You move northward into the sprawling lands of France, where the Black Death continues its grim parade, leaving scars that will linger for generations. The countryside, dotted with small villages and imposing chateaux, wears a veil of silence, broken only by the occasional church bell tolling for the departed. Fields lie fallow, and livestock roam unattended, adding an eerie stillness to the rural landscape. You imagine yourself walking through a village square, where the market is no longer alive with barter and chatter, but deserted, save for stray dogs scavenging for scraps. Fear and superstition grip the hearts of the people here. Some villagers have fled to the forests, hoping isolation will protect them, though in reality, the disease often finds its way regardless. One little-known detail is that in some places, villagers resorted to bizarre folk remedies, wearing amulets, burning incense, or even using frog-based poultices. It's as if they were trying every trick in the book to keep the invisible enemy at bay, from the plausible to the utterly absurd. Imagine slathering frog goo on a sore and hoping for a miracle. Not quite the spa treatment of today's wellness. Trends: the plague's impact on the nobility is just as severe. Castles become tombs, and the loss of heirs sends shockwaves through the fragile feudal system. Power shifts unpredictably as families vanish or scramble to secure their estates. The social order that once seemed unshakable now trembles on the edge of collapse. Yet amidst the despair, you see sparks of resilience. Local communities begin organizing rudimentary health measures, quarantines, burial protocols, and efforts to care for the sick. The seeds of public health practices, though crude, are being sown in these dark times. Historians argue about how France's fragmented political landscape affected the plague's spread. Some believe that constant warfare and troop movements accelerated transmission, while others point to trade routes and pilgrimage paths as culprits. The truth is probably a tangled web of all these factors. As you stroll past a ruined abbey, you hear faint chants from surviving monks, offering prayers for the souls lost and for a world that feels increasingly uncertain. The plague, a curse, or a biological weapon unleashed by fate, is reshaping France's future in ways both terrifying and transformative. You feel the chill of history brush past you, a reminder that even in the deepest darkness, humanity's story goes on, always. Searching for light, you now find yourself in the bustling heart of the Holy Roman Empire, where the Black Death's relentless march challenges the very core of medieval Europe. Cities like Cologne, Frankfurt, and Prague, once thriving centers of commerce, art, and politics, are now gripped by fear and chaos. The narrow streets, usually filled with merchants shouting prices and craftsmen at work, have fallen eerily silent. You walk through the city gates, observing how daily life has changed beyond recognition. Trade has slowed to a crawl, and goods rot unsold on the docks. Guilds struggle to maintain their crafts as their members succumb to the plague. It's as if the world has paused, holding its breath under a dark cloud. One surprising fact you come across is that some local rulers tried desperate measures to save their populations, closing city walls, banning outsiders, and even burning infected houses. Quarantine laws became more structured here, a grim precursor to modern public health. Imagine trying to keep a city safe by locking people inside their homes, not too different from a medieval version of social distancing, minus the Zoom calls. But the plague's social effects are just as profound. The shortage of labor empowers peasants and workers, who begin demanding better wages and conditions. Peasant revolts erupt in some regions, shaking the old feudal hierarchies. The Black Death doesn't just kill bodies, it disrupts centuries-old power dynamics. At the same time, the Church's influence faces new challenges. With so many clergy dead and faith shaken by the scale of suffering, people start seeking new forms of spiritual comfort. Some turn to mystics and apocalyptic prophets, while others grow disillusioned with organized religion altogether. Here's a tidbit you might not expect. In some cities, people started carrying written plague letters, documents declaring they were free of infection, to ease trade and travel. Early versions of health passports, if you will. Though whether these helped or just spread false hope remains a topic for debate among historians. The cultural response to the plague also flourishes, albeit in dark tones. Literature, art, and music begin to reflect the omnipresence of death, with macabre themes reminding everyone that no one escapes the grasp of mortality. As you wander through shadowed alleyways and deserted squares, you sense a continent on the cusp of transformation. Wounded, weary, but awakening to a new reality. And, with that, the Black Death's shadow continues to stretch, reaching even the farthest corners of medieval Europe. You drift westward to the Iberian Peninsula, where Spain and Portugal, vibrant with sun-drenched landscapes and bustling ports, are now grappling with the Black Death's relentless grip. The Mediterranean breeze carries whispers of fear and loss as towns both large and small reckon with a plague that respects no border. As you stroll through the winding streets of Barcelona and Lisbon, You notice how the crisis has disrupted daily rhythms. Churches overflow with mourners. Marketplaces struggle to open and entire families vanish overnight. The plague's reach here intertwines with the complex tapestry of religious and cultural tensions that mark the region. One of the more fascinating and lesser-known facts is how the plague influenced the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to reclaim Iberian lands from Muslim rule. Some scholars suggest that the demographic devastation weakened both Christian and Muslim forces, hastening shifts in power dynamics that shaped the region's future. It's as if the plague was an uninvited player in an already complex Game of Thrones. You see towns implementing their own versions of quarantine, often isolating ships arriving from other Mediterranean ports. The dreaded lazarettos, quarantine stations for maritime travelers, become commonplace, an early attempt to hold back the tide of disease. It's hard not to imagine how frustrating it must have been to wait days or weeks in cramped, uncomfortable conditions, all for a chance to escape the invisible threat. Socially, the plague exacerbates existing tensions. In some areas, minority communities, including Jews and Muslims, face increased persecution, scapegoated for the calamity. The tragic pattern of fear breeding injustice repeats itself, a grim lesson echoed across Europe. Yet even here, resilience glimmers. Art and literature reflect both sorrow and hope, blending religious devotion with emerging humanist ideas. Communities adapt, rebuild, and find ways to persevere. Historians still debate how much the Black Death influenced Iberian exploration that followed in the late 15th century. Did the demographic and social upheaval push the region to seek new worlds and opportunities across the seas? The question lingers like a whisper carried on the ocean breeze. As you stand by the shore, watching the sun dip below the horizon, you feel the centuries fold around you, the Black Death's shadow stretching across time and space, marking an era of profound loss and transformation. And now, having traced this journey from the Silk Road to Iberian shores, you carry with you the echoes of a world forever changed.